Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Brighten-Up-Sunshine, where every day is a new beginning. So today, I was thinking we should probably dive into a critical moment and talk about it in our history here. If you're living in the United States, you know the US dollar's significant challenge that's coming up. The Federal Reserve slashes interest rates. We're hearing a lot of buzz about this, and it's coming up on September 18th, and that's what I'm here to talk about. So let me see if I can type this. What are you guys seeing at your jobs? That's what I'm wondering. So I just dropped that there in the comments. Feel free to comment. But September 18th, it'll be here before you know it. And the Federal Reserve will take action that could, again, reshape our economic landscape. But I do have hope, guys, because we've made it through so much. We have survived so much, and we can do hard things. We can get through this. But I did want to kind of cover through this subject because if it's not affecting you now, chances are it will affect you, or it will affect somebody that you love, and that in turn will affect you. So I wanted to go ahead and kind of talk about it. What will the Federal Reserve's actions of slashing interest rates do? And why should we care? What does it mean for inflation? Will it go up or down? Employment? Will there be massive layoffs? The value of the dollar? So let's dive into that and explore the facts and implications. So the Federal Reserve's decision, again, will be September 18th. And they have already priced in at Wall Street to expect interest rate cuts, marking one of the most significant moves in U.S. history, at least in the past 80 years. The Federal Reserve's decision is going to be a response to the current economic conditions, but it brings with it some significant risk that I don't think everybody understands. We all are like, cut the rates. But according to the Federal Reserve's own report, we are currently in a US dollar bear market, which signifies a prolonged period of declining dollar value. That's what everybody don't understand. And that's according to their own economic data. The impact on inflation. Well, a lower interest rate generally leads to increased borrowing and spending by consumers and businesses alike. And this can stimulate economic growth. It also tends to drive up inflation more. The Consumer Price Index is a key measure of inflation, and it projects to rise significantly as a result of the rate cut. So historically, lower interest rates have correlated with higher inflation rates as seen in 1970 during what we call the stagflation period. So when you take a look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index, you see that we could be heading into a stagflation period again. And there is risk of mass layoffs. As inflation rises, businesses may be faced with increasing goods and labor costs, and this could lead to reduced profit margins and potentially mass layoffs. According to a report by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, higher inflation tends to compress corporate profits, leading to cost-cutting measures. And in those measures of keeping costs down includes layoffs. Historically, we can see this like in the 1980 recession. And even after that, one of the first things they start doing to save money is layoffs. And you can probably see on some of the videos that some have gone viral as well, that you can see them where they're just recording themselves getting laid off. But the other thing that I was thinking about is the devaluing dollar. With the Federal Reserve's interest rate cuts, the dollar's value is likely to decline more. So if you have a high interest savings account, it would pay less when they cut the interest rates, for example. But that's just how it affects you personally. What about other countries? And if our dollar loses more value, will they want to hold it? Some countries are already dropping the dollar. So the dollar's depreciation will impact international trade, making U.S. exports cheaper and imports more expensive. So when we're shipping things across seas, it'll be cheaper for them because our dollar will not be as good. But when they're importing things in, since our dollar's not as good, we'll have to spend more money for those imports. And this devaluation is going to lead to trade imbalances with potential long-term effects and economic stability. So if you take a look at some of the things the Fed said and the International Monetary Fund has highlighted, there's currency devaluation concerns. And we can see this anytime there's aggressive monetary policy. Let's look at some historical context. To understand the gravity of this situation, it's helpful to look historically back at parallels. The last major period of a significant dollar devaluation and economic turbulence, we don't have to look that far. And we can see 2008, right? We can see 1980s. The Federal Reserve under Chairman Paul Volcker raised interest rates at that time sharply to combat inflation. And if I'm not mistaken, they lowered it as well. But that's an interesting one that I've heard over and over people have talked about is 1980s. And during that time, it's led to a deep recession, but eventually did stabilize the economy. But he had to raise the interest rates to stop the inflation, because before that, they would lower the interest rates to try to stimulate, because it's like a balancing act. And it's a hard job. I wouldn't want it. It is a hard, like I think it would be a very hard job trying to figure out how to land this ship. And now we are paying $1 trillion in interest alone on our national debt. So we're nowhere where we were in 1980. This is a whole new world with the national debt at insane amount of, like, I believe it's $35 trillion right now. So given these potential outcomes, it is going to be essential for people to prepare financially. And if you have investments, if you're lucky enough to have those, you want to diversify as much as possible. Some practical things you could do. I was listening to different people talk about our debt that we hold personally, and not just as a nation, but personal family debts, and businesses is in debt. Everybody's in debt right now. And there has to be some part of something that hurts enough that people are like, we have to reduce the debt and monitor the inflation trends. Also is going to be very helpful to mitigate the impact of the economy on your stability or instability. So you reduce your debt as much as possible. Now, some people would say you need to consult with financial advisors on that. I would say that I will leave that to you personally. There's a lot of good financial advice that is totally free without a financial advisor. And that's just get out of debt. Live on less than you make. And if you do get laid off, redo your budget. You have to stay informed, though, and understand the Federal Reserve's decisions, and that will be crucial in navigating the uncertain times. So the Federal Reserve is going to prepare for this interest rate cut, and we have to be prepared for inflation more. Employment may actually start not being as great as it's been, and there might be massive layoffs, which have already started. So I think it would be important as well to understand why cutting interest rates could actually cause more inflation. See, cutting interest rates this time is a little bit different. So let's break down how interest rates affect the economy. When the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates, it becomes cheaper to borrow money. Businesses and consumers tend to take out more loans because they pay less interest on borrowed money. And then there's more cash flowing into the economy, and people and companies spend more on goods and services and investments. That seems great, right? It seems like a flourishing thing. But we've already did that after COVID because there was so much built up demand. We've already did that. And that's what caused where we are in inflation. So the increased demand for goods and services pushed up the prices. When people spend more, businesses raise the prices because they knew customers could afford to pay more. And the rise in prices is what we call inflation. So if we're already in an inflationary moment, and then the Federal Reserve says, okay, let's cut the interest rates, do you think that's going to rise inflation even more, even faster? If you don't think so, then wonderful if you're right, but not wonderful if you're wrong. And so none of us know, none of us have a crystal ball to actually know exactly which way this is going, but this is a possibility. And you can see where this happened in countries like Venezuela. So money supply and inflation, we have to understand it, and these are things we are not taught in school. Lower interest rates increase the money supply. The banks lend out more money, which creates more circulating of money and currency in the economy. And the more money there is chasing the same amount of goods, the more likely prices are to rise. So this is why it causes inflation. Too much money available, but the supply of goods and services, if they actually decrease because maybe companies won't buy as much, because remember, buying from these other countries is going to cost us more because our dollar will actually have lost more value. So if the supply chain, if we have less goods, then it really won't matter if we have more money, because the inflation, the cost of those less goods would be drove up more. So more money in the economy generally leads to higher demand. But if supply doesn't keep up, then guess what happens? Prices rise. The dollar's value continues to decline. When interest rates drop, returns on investments in US dollars also fall, making the dollar less attractive to foreign investors buying our bonds. They won't want them. And this will lead to a lower demand for US dollar in international markets, weakening its value. And why would this cause inflation? A weaker dollar makes imports, remember, goods brought into the country more expensive. When it costs more to import products, companies raise prices to maintain profits, and those increased costs are passed on to consumers, which will keep inflating the economy. There are historical patterns of inflation. Historically, when the Fed actually cut interest rates during times of high economic uncertainty or economic stimulus efforts, like in '08, the financial crisis, we can see that policies from the Federal Reserve can sometimes often overstimulate the economy. In 2024, with inflation's already a concern, though, from the previous economic pressures like supply chain disruptions and higher consumer spending, lower rates further inflates the economy. So this is a real possibility. If interest rates are cut too much, there could be a surge in borrowing and spending that leads to overheating the economy. With more people spending, but no matching increase in the production of goods, supply shortages can arise, which will drive prices up even faster. And this can cause inflation. When the supply of the goods can't meet the demand, it results in price increases across all sectors, fueling inflation even further. So if they don't buy as much products and there's less to buy, especially as we're coming around Christmas season, you can see where this could be a catastrophe. Cutting interest rates, it can, and I will not deny that all the economists say it can stimulate the economy by making borrowing cheaper and increasing spending. But this boost in demand, combined with the potential weakened dollar and supply constraints, could lead to price increases. This time, we're already setting in an inflationary time, and cutting rates at this time can actually fuel the fire of inflation more. And then sometimes that also leads to massive layoffs. People could face layoffs as a result of this Fed cut due to several interconnected factors. And let me see if I can break down why this might happen. Inflation increases business cost, as we discussed, right? Cutting interest rates can lead to inflation. And when inflation rises, the cost of doing business is going to increase. As companies pay more for their raw materials, they're more for their utilities and other things to keep their business going. For example, if a company needs to buy steel to manufacture products and rising steel prices due to inflation make it more expensive for them to produce their goods, then more than likely it would lead to layoffs. Businesses often respond to higher costs by cutting expenses. One of the quickest ways, as we've covered, for companies to actually do this is to reduce expenses of employees. So lay off employees, especially in non-essential areas. They do this to preserve their profit margins when their costs are rising. Profit margins shrink. Let's talk about this. Inflation squeezes profit margins because even though costs rise, many businesses cannot always raise their prices at the same rate without losing customers. See, consumers may cut back on spending due to the fact of higher prices, forcing businesses to deal with lower profits. And then companies may lay off their workers to lower their overhead and protect their profits. As the profits shrink, businesses have to find ways to stay viable and reduce their workforce, and this is a very common strategy. Even though lower interest rates make borrowing cheaper, inflation can still reduce consumer purchasing power. As prices rise, people might cut back on non-essential purchases, for example, to focus on necessities like food, rent, and gas. So this reduction in spending can actually hurt businesses that rely on discretionary spending, such as retail, hospitality, and entertainment, because people will be focusing on putting food on the table and not going out to eat as much. And then this would lead to layoffs. With fewer customers and lower revenue, companies in these sectors might actually need to reduce their workforce, making layoffs possible. And adjusting to the decreased demand for their products and services, they again want to show a profit. Quickest way to show a profit is layoffs. Economic uncertainty and cost-cutting measures. Let's talk about this. In an inflationary environment, businesses anticipate future economic downturns or increased costs, even if the economy is not in a recession yet. Companies often take preemptive measures to maintain financial stability by cutting jobs to prepare for harder times ahead. This is actually a defensive strategy to stay financially flexible for the companies, and those who anticipate this rise in inflation or worsening economic condition, then they will take action and possibly lay off their employees to reduce their payroll expenses. Higher borrowing costs for businesses as well. While interest rates actually make borrowing cheaper in the short term, businesses that have high debt may still struggle in an inflationary environment. If inflationary measures continue to rise, long-term borrowing costs can increase, especially if lenders begin demanding higher interest to compensate for the risk of the devaluing dollar. And this could lead to layoffs. Companies that need to borrow money to operate or expand might find it harder to secure affordable loans over time. If they can't access funding easily, they may freeze hiring or lay off staff to conserve cash. And then there could be investor pressures. Like publicly traded companies are under constant pressure from investors to maintain or grow their profit margins. Inflation can erode these margins, causing stock prices to actually drop. Investors may push companies to cut their costs to protect their bottom line and keep the stock prices up. And this could lead to layoffs. Companies may lay off employees to appease their stockholders or their investors who demand cost-saving measures to keep profits intact. And this is particularly common in large corporations where labor is one of the biggest expenses. So as you can see, while cutting the interest rates may seem like a move to stimulate growth, the resulting inflation can actually hurt businesses' bottom line, leading to cost-cutting measures like, as we've talked about, layoffs. Rising costs, shrinking consumer spending, and investor pressures all contribute to this scenario, making layoffs a likely consequence. So that's a lot of not good stuff, but I think it lays a good ground to understand. And I do have some helpful things here. So give me just a second so I can have a drink, because this is a lot to talk about, guys. For the average person, what can they do? The person who's living paycheck to paycheck. What can they do to prepare for a potential economic turbulence, like the rising inflation, layoffs, and devaluing dollar? It can feel overwhelming. And this is a motivational channel. I like to put things out that you can think about and things that are in your control. And there are practical steps that can help people weather financial storms and maintain some level of security. So what are those? Now that we've laid the groundwork, let's get into this. How can you best prepare? Number one, create a basic budget. If you don't already have one, and I know many people live in paycheck to paycheck, they struggle with financial planning. So creating a simple, realistic budget, it's going to be essential. Even if your income is tight, track where your money is going. And this will help identify areas to cut back and build some buffer. So how do you do this? What is in your control? Well, you're going to identify where you can trim expenses to save even a small amount monthly. That should be your goal. You're going to list all your monthly expenses, like your rent, your groceries, utilities, etc. And of course, your income right now, which if you were laid off, you will have to have a whole nother budget. Categorize them into essentials on one side and needs and non-essentials, otherwise known as wants, on the other. And again, you can use apps for this, but I just like a plain piece of paper that I can just draw a line down and it puts needs on one side and wants on the other so that I can visually see what's the difference. Because remember, the main goal should be trim expenses to save, even if it's small amounts of money. Number 2, you should have a goal of building an emergency fund. Even small amounts matter. While saving money can feel impossible for someone living paycheck to paycheck, start small. And it makes a huge difference over time. Having even $500 to $1,000 set aside for emergencies can prevent somebody from going into debt for unexpected expenses. And actually, if times get really hard, just going to the bank and getting a loan may not even be an option for many people. So start saving small, even just $5 or $10 a week. Just don't go out to eat one time a week. And how much will you save? Think about it, because it all adds up. So you want to set up automatic transfers to your savings account if at all possible. Use windfalls like your tax refunds, gifts, or bonuses to boost your savings. Any severance package if you do get laid off. Build the small emergency fund over time for unseen expenses like car repairs, medical bills, just things that we don't know. Just your rainy day fund. Number 3 thing, cut non-essential expenses. Remember on that side of the sheet of paper that was the wants? Look at it. When preparing for potential financial struggles, it's going to be important to prioritize spending. And this may mean, for short terms, sacrificing to protect financial stability in the long term. You want to cancel or reduce streaming services possibly. Subscription boxes, those are non-essential services. Opt for generic brands when you go shopping, like at the grocery store, or household items, or learn to make your own. Reduce or eliminate dining out and coffee shop purchases. Coffee shop purchases are some of the most inflated area. When you can make a cup of coffee for less than a quarter at home, and they're charging $5 to $10 for coffee, you want to free up as much cash as possible to cover essentials and build that savings account. Number 4, how about pay down high interest debt? Debts can be a huge burden, especially when inflation causes prices to rise and interest rates increase. Now we're talking about an interest rate decrease, but will it eventually increase because inflation gets kicked out more? So they can raise interest rates really fast too. So pay down those high interest debts like the credit cards should be one priority because it reduces the amount that you'll need to spend on interest. But before you worry about your interest in your debit cards or your credit cards, I want you to think about having the essential things covered. Essential first. You want food, you want shelter, you want water, and you want to keep the lights on. But you should, when you get some reserve cash, pay off the credit cards with high interest loans first. This is known as the snowball or avalanche method. To tackle debts efficiently, you could pay off the smallest debt first for momentum or the highest interest debt first for savings. And I would suggest the highest interest debt first, but I do understand if you want to go with the smallest debt first. Consider consolidating debts into lower interest loans if at all possible. Only if you can and only if it's unsecured. Do not take an unsecured debt and go get it secured. And what I mean by unsecured is if they take you to court, then they could garnish your wages. But if you're laid off, good luck to them. Secured would be like you go get a car loan or like a payday loan, but with a title loan is what I'm trying to think of. And you put your title on the line, that's a paid off car, but you need to pay off a credit card debt. That's not good, because if you do get yourself in a pickle and you can't pay that off, then they can come get the car. So that's the difference between secured and unsecured. And the goal, though, is to reduce financial strain that comes with debt payments and free up more cash flow so you can just be heavy on cash. Number 5 thing that you can practically do: learn new skills to increase your income. With the risk of layoffs looming, having diverse skills can make someone more employable. Upskilling or learning a side hustle can actually help supplement income or open doors for new job opportunities. Look for free or low-cost courses online like Udemy or Skillshare, and you can learn new skills like coding, graphic design, digital marketing. There's whole kinds of skills there. House building, DIY projects. You could explore gig economy options such as driving for Uber, delivering DoorDash, freelancing on Fiverr. Consider picking up extra part-time work or side hustles to bring in additional income. Temporarily, this would at least help to get you a savings to the side, that emergency fund. The goal would be to diversify income streams and increase employment opportunities in case you did lose a job. Number 6, focus on essentials in times of inflation. As inflation prices rise on everyday items like groceries and gas, it makes it harder for paycheck to paycheck households to even afford necessities. So focus on essential purchases, and this will help you stretch every dollar. So, for example, if you have to stop and get gas, gas is an essential to get you from point A to B. But the soda in the gas station is just a want. So some action steps that you could take is prioritize spending on basic needs, housing, food, utilities, transportation, use coupons, wait for sales to happen, discount apps to save on money when you go like grocery shopping. Or sometimes if you shop, you can get cash back on some of those apps. A big giant way to save is plan meals and batch cook to avoid last minute expenses for food purchases. Another thing you could do is take food with you when you know you're going to be gone more than 2 hours. Take a pack of bananas with you, because a pack of bananas is like 25 cents a banana, where if you stop at the gas station to get a banana, it's going to be like $1.50 for one banana. So think ahead, plan your meals ahead, plan your travel ahead. It goes back to like during the Great Depression, they would say a penny saved is a penny earned. You have to get that mentality. It'll help you stretch your money further by focusing on what's essential and finding ways to lower cost. Seek community and government assistance if needed, though. There's no shame in using available resources if inflation continues to rise or layoffs happen. Community programs and government assistance, while they're available, can help families stay afloat. So if you need to, research food assistance programs like the SNAP benefits, the WIC if you have young children. Look into energy assistance programs that could help with heating and utility bills. Seek out nonprofit organizations that offer financial counseling or help with rent and bills during tough times. And again, the goal of all of this is utilize available resources to ease the burden that you would have so that you could avoid falling deeper into financial hardship during trying times. So don't be ashamed to ask for help. Number 8, consider inflation-resistant investments for those with some savings. If someone has managed to save or invest, it's wise to consider inflation-resistant investments. Things like real estate, some say this time no, but history has proved, if history has anything to say with this time, because this is a little different. TIPS, Treasury inflated protected securities. That's something you could check out. To preserve the value of your money during periods of inflation if you have any savings. For those who don't have savings, your goal is to just try to get some savings and to slow your spending on the want side and to stack it away so that you can sustain yourself on the necessity side. If you're already investing, some of the experts say consider moving part of the portfolio into assets that tend to perform well in inflationary periods. And again, that would be real estate, commodities, inflation-protected bonds. For smaller savers, look into high-yield savings accounts or CDs with inflation-like returns. Protect your savings and investments from losing value due to inflation. That would be the goal in that if you have any savings. Number 9, prepare for layoffs. Have a plan B. With layoffs as a potential outcome of economic instability, it's going to be important to be prepared mentally and financially. Have a plan in case of job loss. It'll help you to have less shock. Begin researching unemployment benefits, eligibility in case of layoffs. Then you would know about how much you would draw and kind of have a budget to the side for that. Update your resume, your LinkedIn profile. Start networking now to build connections in case you need to look for another job. Be ready to take action if job loss occurs. Reduce the downtime between job loss and a new job. Number 10. Practical steps that you could take. Stay informed and adapt quickly. It's important to stay informed about the economic changes. The average person does not need to follow the stock market every day, guys, but keep an eye on the major trends, such as inflation rates, Fed policies, job market conditions. This can help you to react quickly to new developments. Okay, so we've talked about following news sources, financial experts for updates. Revisit the budget and financial plan regularly. As economic conditions change, so should your budget. Adjust spending habits and saving goals as needed. This is huge. Be flexible and ready to make changes as the economy evolves. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, the key to surviving economic turbulence is preparation, even if it starts small. By budgeting, cutting non-essential expenses, saving when possible, building multiple income streams, the average person can actually create some level of financial resilience. It's all about small, manageable steps that build long-term security. Remember that. With a bit of preparation, anyone can get through the storm. You've been through storms before, and you'll make it through this. This approach balance will help you take practical steps for immediate relief while also focusing on your future stability. Ensure that even people with limited means can take actions. These steps will ensure that. Now, we cannot control the Federal Reserve, but the Fed does have several tools at its disposal to manage the economy, especially in situations involving inflation, unemployment, and financial stability. So I want you to understand slowdowns and the risk of layoffs. Monetary policy, adjusting interest rates. See, the Fed will raise interest rates when inflation is high. The Fed typically raises interest rates to reduce consumers and businesses from spending, which will lower demand and in turn cool off inflation. However, this can slow economic growth and potentially lead to layoffs. Now, the other thing they can do is cut interest rates. To stimulate the economy during a downturn, the Fed can cut rates to encourage borrowing and spending, and this can be effective in boosting short-term growth, but may worsen inflation if prices are already rising. And that is what we're seeing. The Fed faces a tough choice here. Cutting interest rates could stimulate the economy and prevent mass layoffs, but it could also fuel inflation further. Raising rates might control inflation, but it could slow growth, leading to job layoffs. So both ways, these could lead to job layoffs, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, because it's something that we have to deal with right now. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard about quantitative easing or quantitative tightening. Quantitative easing is something that happens during times of economic downturn. The Fed can inject money into the economy by buying government bonds or other securities. This increases the money supply, lowers long-term interest rates, and encourages borrowing and investing. And quantitative tightening is the Fed's ability to reduce inflation and control the money supply. They sell off assets or let them mature, effectively pulling money out of the economy with quantitative tightening. So they reduce liquidity and potentially increase long-term interest rates. And that's where we've been. See, we were in QE, but now they've been doing QT. The current dilemma is QE, quantitative easing, can help boost the economy during a recession, but a high inflation environment, it could make inflation worse. QT might actually cool inflation, but it could also slow economic growth and lead to more layoffs. So the Fed actually often uses forward guidance to communicate the future policy intentions to financial markets and us, the public, by signaling whether it's a plan to raise or cut interest rates in the future. The Fed influences the behavior of the market and the market's expectations, and they price it in. The Fed may use forward guidance to reassure the markets that it's committed to managing inflation without causing unnecessary economic damage. So I think their goal is to have us at 2% inflation, and we're about 3% right now, and they're talking about cutting interest rates. So this communication that the Fed has can actually hurt or stabilize the market expectations. I'm sure they're hoping to prevent panic. Adjusting the reserve requirements. The Fed can change the amount of money banks are required to keep in reserves, which affects how much they can lend out. Lowering the reserve requirements increase the amount of money the banks can lend, while raising it reduces their liquidity. And these are just some things, again, we're not taught in school. Lowering the reserve requirements can boost lending, but it may fuel inflation by increasing the money supply. Raising the reserve requirements can help reduce inflation, but may slow down borrowing and investment. So these are things for you to know when you hear what they're doing. And then you'll know, what's the long term, what does this mean? If the banks have a liquidity crisis, if the banks are able to loan more, if QE and QT, what do these things mean? It's good for you to become financially educated. So, fiscal policies from the government. Let's talk about this. While the Fed handles monetary policy, it can advocate for the government actions through fiscal policy to balance the economy, like stimulus spending, government spending to boost economic growth, tax adjustments, cut taxes to increase disposable income or raise them to curb inflation. The Fed often works in conjunction with Congress and the Treasury Department to ensure fiscal policies like stimulus checks or infrastructure investments, and that they align with goals of prices, stability, and employment. Let's see where we're at here. All right. The Fed has used emergency lending facilities during crises like COVID to ensure businesses and consumers have access to credit. And these programs target specific industries or groups facing liquidity shortages and aim to stabilize sectors in distress without lowering interest rates broadly. Now, if layoffs and business closures would increase, the Fed could reopen such programs to support struggling industries without affecting the entire economy. That's a possibility. What about balancing full employment and price stability? The Fed has dual mandates. Full employment, ensure as many people as possible are employed. Price stability, keep inflation under control. The current challenge, though, is the Fed must carefully balance between the two mandates. Raising interest rates to fight inflation might protect the value of the dollar, but it risks increasing unemployment. Cutting rates to support job growth could worsen inflation, devaluing purchasing power. So you can see why they don't want to just keep raising rates because of all of that. But if they don't and they lower, they could have all that anyway. In the short term, they would be better, possibly, and maybe that's what they're thinking. But in the long term, it could get harder. Monitor global economic conditions. That's what I would say. The Fed needs to be watched as close as possible. And global economic factors like supply chain disruptions, international trade policies, geopolitical events, these can all affect inflation and economic growth in the U.S. Given currently global supply chain issues still and geopolitical tensions we see in our own politics, the Fed may need to adapt its policies to external shocks as well, making decisions based not only on domestic conditions, but on the broader global landscape, as we hear about China's economy teetering right now. So what's next? What is next for all of us? Again, I have just as much knowledge about what's next as you guys. None of us know for sure, so we must be prepared for everything. The Fed is in a very complex situation. It's going to need to balance controlling inflation with preventing economic slowdown and layoffs. They may continue raising the interest rates gradually to cool the inflation, but now we're hearing they're not going to. They don't want to be too aggressive, so they want to prevent a recession. I wonder, will they end up using some tools like quantitative tightening or quantitative easing? Are they going to pump more money into the market to try to get some of the layoffs that have already occurred to hire back? I have no idea. And this is why it's uncertain times. And that's why I wanted to talk about some practical steps that you guys could take today. My hope is you've gained some value out of this. And you can take small steps today, whether it's building that emergency fund, learning a new skill, or simply cutting a few unnecessary expenses. You're investing in a brighter, more secure future for yourself. And tough times, guys, do not last forever, but tough people do. So stay focused, stay productive, keep your eyes on the horizon, and always remember the sun always rises. I hope that you guys found value in this. If you've not subscribed already, please do so. I'll see you in the next video.